It is the end of 2024, which is mad. This year has felt a bit like running on a treadmill, like exerting a lot of energy to stay in the same place. Forgive the cat, he's having a tantrum because it's only an hour and a half before he's normally fed, and therefore it's outrageous that he's not been fed yet. But I still think, like, despite not making much progress, put together some solid videos on this channel this year, and written a few decent ones for Wisecrack as well. Personally, I think that the video on Ecocide is one of the best arguments I've put together, and really gets to something about the nature of ecocide and genocide that not all that many people have, put together on YouTube or, outside of YouTube. I was also very pleased with this video on market socialism and why it's fake. For ages, I had people asking for some real nuts and bolts introduction to Marxian theory. So I think I was able to put that together in quite a solid video, which also let me, be a little bit of a slag. Another standout, oddly enough, was this video where I picked apart the methodology and bizarre misrepresentations of an academic paper attacking degrowth. I didn't expect this video to do particularly well because who gives a shit about critiquing a, niche academic paper. But you little weirdos, it seemed, kind of interesting. You gave a shit for some reason. And filming this now, my family abolition video has yet to come out. So, by the time this comes out, it might have done shite. But trust me when I say that, I think the video is good. I think it came out well. And the trailer that I cut together for it turned out maybe better than the video. Your granny sucks. I mean your granny specifically. She sucks. She's not really the issue with the family. Fundamentally, the family is capitalism's prime unit of social reproduction. Just as communism aims to make public the productive sphere, it must also make public the social reproductive one. Private domestic labour should be transformed into a collaborative public industry under communism. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. So, it's Christmas time. Sit back, relax with your family, and listen to why I think we should kill your grandmother. So we've made some solid work on this channel over the year, and I thought as a kind of fun sum up of the year, I'm going to do a wee top 10-ish list of books I've read over the past year, most of which have directly influenced the videos we've all enjoyed. We've all enjoyed them, right? And at the end of this video, I'll give you a little insight into the video plans I have moving forward. So, organised by theme, not by ranking. These are not the top 10 by order of what I think is the best and worst of this top 10, but just what I think makes sense as a list. Here is my ranking of my top 10-ish books of the year. It was not the abolitionists alone who freed the slaves. The abolitionists never had a real majority of the people of the United States back of them. Freedom for the slaves was the logical result of a crazy attempt to wage a war in the midst of 4 million black slaves, and trying the while to sublimely ignore the interests of those slaves in the outcome of the fighting. Yet, these slaves had enormous power in their hands. So, kicking it off with what is a bit of a cheat because I read most of this last year and just finished it early in 2024. But I'm making the rules here and I say it's fine. So, Black Reconstruction is of course an absolute classic. Tracking the movement of black labour through slave revolts, fighting in the US Civil War and attempts to craft a labour democracy against the ongoing pressures and counter-revolution imposed by American white supremacy, Du Bois highlighted the agency of black labour as a motor force of history rather than passive objects to be harmed or saved or buffeted by the historical winds of progress. In this sense, Du Bois was practically applying Marx's historical method in one of the most effective ways I've ever seen. He understands the role of different racial dynamics as constitutive of the class relations of society, rather than superstructural ideological elements or false consciousness. And Du Bois as a figure is fascinating. He lived for so long and lived through so much, which obviously changed his perspective of the world. He was born in 1868 and died in 1963. He founded the NAACP, attended the first Pan-Africanist conference, travelled to China to meet with Mao, and eventually spent his final days as a citizen of Ghana after the US refused to renew his passport. And throughout this expansive life, his politics obviously changed. His early work was characterised by a belief in the talented 10th concept, which emphasised the role of educating black leaders as a means to produce emancipatory politics. This is obviously quite different to the theoretical positions which informed black Reconstruction, where the force of black labour is the historical agent rather than a select group of highly educated leaders. And so, even figures critical of the Marxist tradition like Cedric Robinson acknowledge Black Reconstruction was Du Bois at his most Marxist. It's a book which has relevance far beyond the understanding of the history of black labour struggles and emancipation in the US, but for understanding the application of Marxism to the study of history. I will say, this is obviously a challenging book to get through. It's massive, and there are extended sections examining political machinations of various legislatures and large tracts of historical evidence, which can be, let's be honest, deadly boring. One of the reasons it took so long to get through is because the sheer volume of evidence produced and presented made me fall asleep very quickly. Sometimes I'd open it up and just be like, you're reading lists of different state legislatures' actions and just like, Jesus Christ, I can't take it. But between the tracks of historical evidence is some of the most exhilarating writing that I've ever read, and insights that just make you just hit bolt upright because they're just so good and so they change your thinking in such a specific way. Things like the quote at the start, the stuff that makes you sit bolt upright and say, yes, it's electrifying. So if you do decide to read this, just take your time and keep at it because it is worth it in every way. I shall be calling Orientalism a way of coming to terms with the Orient that is based on the Orient's special place in European Western experience. The Orient is not only adjacent to Europe, it is also the place of Europe's greatest and richest and oldest colonies, the source of its civilizations and languages, its cultural contestant, and one of its deepest and most recurring images of the other. So I read a few classics this year. The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James was also fantastic and part of the re-examination of black labour as a motor force of history. And one second. And this sort of illustrated version of Black Jacobins was also great and a great change of pace and definitely worth getting as well. But I think among that, the most eminently readable of the classics I read this year was definitely Syed's Orientalism. And I hadn't expected this. I've read and enjoyed Syed's other work, whether about public intellectualism or as part of collections on Palestine. But I don't know, I kind of had an assumption that Orientalism would be a challenge. Rewarding, but a challenge, which is one of the reasons I put it off for so long. But instead, I find it quite accessible, and the writing was immediately welcome. Syed, expertly and quite humbly attentive to the limitations of literary analysis, guides us through the history of a very specific kind of Orientalism. He shows that the ways in which the figure of the Orient is always subordinated to certain key ways to Western translations. The Orient cannot speak, it can only be interpreted. Soon after finishing this, I ended up watching a documentary on the BBC called The Man Who Discovered Egypt, about a guy called Flinders Petrie. And what was astounding about this documentary is that it came out in 2012, and yet it committed basically every single Orientalist sin that Syed traces out in this book. It was fucking bizarre. The presenter seemed to have no critical view of calling a documentary about a Victorian Egyptologist from England the man who discovered Egypt. But yet, as Syed details, the people of Egypt can't speak. They can only ever be discovered, rediscovered, translated, and understood in relation to the West. And this is functionally a dehumanization of Orientalized subject. And, Obviously, in the ongoing context of genocide in Palestine, this dehumanization of Orientalist subjects remains grimly relevant. In its essence, settler colonialism is the formation of new ecologies. In thinking of an ecology as a set of entangled relationships, a system of human interaction with landscapes, terrains, and non-human beings, the violence directed against the land and the ecosystems that inhabit it also gives shape to the decolonial tactics and strategies that are mobilized. Put differently, new terrains of warfare induce new landscapes of resistance. So, staying in Palestine, this recent work by Balami, largely written before the current genocidal destruction by Israel, is immensely valuable. Balami looks at the ways in which Israel has, for decades, utilised the environments surrounding Gaza as a means of containment, colonisation and destruction. She highlights the hypocrisy of Israel's colonial mantra to make the desert bloom by showing how Israel turned previously lush land in and around Gaza into a desert to contain the population and more easily murder Palestinians at will. One of the most instructive elements of this book was highlighting how Israel destroyed and then appropriated Palestinian citriculture, that is, the culture associated with farming citrus trees. The tracking of this colonial appropriation was a really essential part in constructing the argument regarding ecocide in Palestine for this Ecocide video. And I'd recommend this short book to absolutely everyone as a way of highlighting the continuity of genocide in Palestine that has been ongoing for decades. The world's first known corporation was a Swedish mining company called Stora Kopparberg. The founding certificate of the company, dated 1288, is the earliest documented evidence of a profit-making corporation. Remarkably, the corporation still exists today in its present-day guise. Stora Kopparberg, now known as Stora Enso, is the second largest paper producer in the world and is based in Helsinki. So, sticking with the theme of ecocide, this book by David Whyte was also invaluable for constructing my argument about what ecocide actually is. Whyte argues that ecocide is a structural imperative of capitalism. Its insatiable need to expand and grow and consume and extract can be connected to the climate catastrophe in which we are all living. The need to extract ever more resources in ever more extreme ways is also intimately connected to the erosion of indigenous sovereignty and the destruction of their lands, their lives, and their cultural existence as a people. In both these senses, David Whyte makes the argument that capitalism is necessarily ecocidal. Whyte structures this narrative with reference to the first known corporation, Stora Kopparberg, a corporation set up by German merchants to mine copper in Sweden in 1288. And as we saw, this corporation still exists to this day and is the second biggest paper producer in the world. By looking at this history of the corporation, Whyte reveals the legal fictions, colonial logics, and corporate functions which make this economic form such a good method through which capital can express its logic. He highlights how limited liability allows corporations to act in destructive and criminal ways without any single person ever really being held to account. But he's careful not to just say that what is needed is just stronger regulation. Even when acting completely legally, in line with regulation, the corporation is not able to treat the environment as anything more than a resource to exploit for commodity production. This narrative is both accessible and deeply depressing. I got my mum to read this book and she said it left her feeling profoundly depressed. It's about climate catastrophe. It's not going to be light. But it's definitely a book worth reading if you're new to the concept of ecocide or want to dive more into it after watching my video. Being in the world was a much greater and stranger thing than she had ever dreamed. To switch up the pace a little, here's a couple novels I read this year that were just fantastic. They were great stuff. Again, I'm cheating a bit here because the Earthsea series is a series of novels, but you can buy it as one book, so it still counts as one. I still make the rules, fuck you. These novels by Le Guin exist in the magical world of Earthsea, a fantasy world where magic emanates from understanding the true name of a person or an animal or a dragon. The first book follows the young wizard Ged as he arrogantly sets loose an evil into the world that he eventually has to confront and kind of just accept it as part of himself. And all of them are great, but it's the Tombs of Atuan and the later novel Tahanu that really cemented these books as some of the best novels I've ever read. The Tombs of Atuan follows a young princess of dark, pitch-black tombs as she comes across Ged in her domain. And through her interactions with Ged, she begins to question her position and reassert her own selfhood against the oppressive position of her own fragile authority. Through this, the darkness which surrounds her changes from a comfortable sort of soft presence to something deeply threatening and quite scary. It's a really good transition in the way that darkness is described and used in the book. I found that, exhilarating. In Tahanu, which is written decades after the Tombs of Atuan, this priestess is now a middle-aged farmer's wife, just living her life. And you can see Le Guin's development as a feminist thinker and author through these two books. And I don't really know how to describe it to you, but it is so good. Just this book about this woman dealing with this shit in her life. It's just great. And I'm sad that I don't have any more Earthsea books to return to, but what's amazing about Le Guin's world building is that with every new detail of the world or of the history or of the story, the world just feels plausibly real and completely incomplete. There's a history that you can never fully grasp. And it's just, in short, like a living, breathing world. And beyond just the novels that are written, I think that's just a really incredible achievement for an author. Great book. He was quiet, holding that string and kite with everything he had. The way he looked, eyes raised up, body tethered by one long thread to the big stormy sky, the whole of him up there with his words, talking to whoever was listening. I've not seen a sight to match it. No bones of his had ever been shoved in a feed bag. The man was a giant. Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead was another fantastic novel I read this year. Taking the story of David Copperfield, Kingsolver moves it from Dickensian England to 90s rural Virginia, which is an inspired move. The poverty, the opioid use, the destruction and survival explored by the novel don't just retread the themes Dickens explores, but transforms them into something completely relevant and entirely moving. Kingsolver is one of my favourite authors. The W.E.B is one of my all-time favourite books, but there are moments in this that just hit me unexpectedly, emotionally hard. It's not the horrors of the book, of which there are many, but the brief moments of respite that the protagonist demon finds with his grandmother and the kindly Mr. Dick who flies his kite like that. That really got to me. There was a resonance of the exaggerated family figures that just hit me really hard emotionally. I won't talk too long about it because I don't want to ruin anything, but this truly was an incredible work from Kingsolver. It got me so hard that I did something I've never done before, which was actually write a letter. Not an email, because she didn't have an email listed, but an actual letter to Barbara Kingsolver to be like, hey, this fucking ruled. I said more than that, but that was essentially it. These barricades became sites of what I call insurgent social reproduction. The transformation of the daily tasks of household labour into means of sustaining militant protest. Sticking with the theme of families, M.E. O'Brien's Family Abolition was probably the best introduction to the topic of family abolition that I've read this year or any. The book is laid out in 3 sections which guide you through the theory and history of family abolition. It begins with the crisis of social reproduction within the family in the present, using the COVID pandemic to illustrate 3 interrelated sites of social reproduction under capitalism: the family, the market, and the state. And the book also then highlights how fraught and filled with exploitation this social reproductive arrangement is. The second part is concerned with the history of family abolition. It examines the impact capitalist industrialisation had on the family, the central place of slavery and colonialism in constructing family ideals, and the ebbs and flows of proletarian revolt against the modern family. And finally, part 3 examines areas of resistance to the family, whether that is through queer social movements or through radical social movements which seek to alter how social reproduction occurs. The potential and the limits of these methods are examined quite clearly and forensically. O'Brien's concept of insurgent social reproduction is, I think, one of the most interesting new concepts that I got from the book. She understands this as a process of making public the privatised realm of social reproduction as a means of pursuing revolutionary action. This concept is simultaneously highlights the essential role of often gendered labour in actually making revolutionary action possible, while using the moment of upended social relations to challenge the exploitation of the family mode of being. It made me think of the concept of housework strikes proposed by the autonomous Marxist feminists in the 1960s, and the importance of moving revolutionary activity beyond the narrow workerist confines of just the workplace. It also, I think, highlights how it's through revolutionary action that the new world is born, breaking the assumptions of the capitalist world through action and opening up new ways to build the future. And this book was obviously extremely useful as a jumping off point for my research of the family abolition video. I actually did read it cover to cover twice this year. Because, it was handy. Here is my method. Above all, feeling. I aim through experiments in feeling to reveal and destroy what it is that keeps us here. What it is that stops us from deciding to leave, even as the cinders mix with our hair, the smoke corrupts our lungs, the flames engulf the people we love. Only when we know this can we activate the bond of otherwise and back to meet it. Some call it the communist horizon. This implies some distance between us and the future. Others call it prefiguration, the future in our actions. Others, the worlds we seek to build. Desire, desire, desire. Any name will do. Part of my research for this family abolition video ended up being this book by Lola Olufemi. Despite the fact that it wasn't really about family abolition, this is one of the most idiosyncratic. I found it really interesting and really useful because of the ways it examined themes and topics in an idiosyncratic way that I wouldn't normally approach things by. I'd normally find it quite difficult to engage with a book like this. It's a series of poems and short stories and polemics which explore various themes of black feminism, and it's absolutely wonderful. It came with a playlist of tracks to listen to alongside reading it, which was great. The music was great, and you should just listen to the playlist on its own because it's really good. And the various poems and stories were just engrossing. I don't really know what else to say about this except that it felt less like reading, and to sound like a massive piece of shit for a second, it felt more like experiencing art. So yeah, I'd fully recommend engaging with this book, even if it sounds like something that you wouldn't normally go for. Where austerity has proven wildly effective is in insulating capitalist hierarchies from harm during these moments of would-be social change. Austerity is capitalism's protector, popular among states for its effectiveness and billed as a means of fixing economies by increasing their efficiency. Short-term readjustments for long-term gains. However, if we view austerity as a response not just to economic crisis, but to a crisis of capitalism, we can begin to see method in the madness. Austerity is a vital bulwark in the defence of the capitalist system. So, changing paces once again, The Capital Order by Clara Mattei, I think that's how you pronounce her name, Mattei, was another great read. This book highlights the continuities between liberal and fascist economic and political orders. It's mainly a history where Mattei traces the similarities between the Italian fascist rise and the austerity politics of interwar Britain. She essentially builds on the best parts of Michael Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds to demonstrate how liberal and fascist economics converged on a desire to destroy any power of organised labour and rebalance the capital relation in favour of capital. Mattei looks specifically at the two cases of Britain and Italy in the interwar periods. She demonstrates that in both cases, austerity was a reaction by capital against the growing power of organised labour and recent enfranchisement of segments of the public who now had the unacceptable control over the levers of economic decision-making. The reaction in both Italy and Britain was to turn to ever more inaccessible technocratic economics, which hides behind a claim of apolitical science. Sound familiar? In this period, technocratic central banks with little to no democratic oversight were given immense power to impact wages and unemployment rates through their control of things like interest rates. And in the final section, Mattei highlights the continuities between the rise of fascism and neoliberal era austerity today. And it's an extremely valuable, but one of the things I think that made this such an interesting and valuable book for me to read was that it still remained quite incomplete. And the reason I included it here is because it's been so valuable as a jumping off point for my own work on the continuities between emergent fascism and ongoing neoliberalism. And in the new year, we're going to explore this in some videos and a paper that me and a friend of mine have written and is currently in review. Racial taxonomies depend on the management of populations, what Michel Foucault refers to as biopolitics. The modern state, whether colonial or national, employs methods of exclusion, such as deportation and incarceration, even as it distributes resources, such as healthcare and education. While it may be tempting to view the state as Janus-faced or two-sided, giving with one hand while taking with the other, these functions are less two sides of the same coin and more a continuum of measures through which populations can be managed. So I topped off the year with an incredibly insightful book called Deadly and Slick by Sita Balami. In this examination of the creation of tools of racial organisation and domination of British Asians, Balami utilises and expands upon Foucauldian ideas of biopolitics. Foucault's analysis is applied, critiqued, and reworked in combination with other schools like social reproduction theory to demonstrate how the British state has created a specific kind of racial control over British Asians. This analysis highlights how race, class and gender are simultaneously constructed and reconstructed in specific ways and in specific locations. One particularly horrific theme throughout the book is how the British state's fear of the orientalised sexuality of Asian migrants is leveraged to produce just awful, violent border regimes, which serve to uphold the racial hygiene of the white British state. This book was extremely helpful in filling out some of the themes of the recent family abolition video. It demonstrates the function of the family in upholding white supremacy in Britain and the function of the state in upholding that ideal of the family, whether that's a target of destruction or selective reunification. And I also it might sound a bit distant or academic-y, but I actually do think this is quite an accessible and readable book as well. And if you're familiar with the stuff that I do on this channel, you should be in good enough stead to pick up this book and just get reading. If anyone's interest is piqued by the description here, please do have a look for it and give it a read. I think also that description early on about the temptation to view the Janus-faced state as doing good things but also doing bad things, and it's like a push and pull, is a really good addendum to that old video I did on the G Word, the Adam Conover book, Adam Conover show. Because I think that's exactly the kind of thing that Sita Balami is critiquing there. It's not that the state does good and bad things, but they are different techniques of managing and controlling populations. And I think that's very useful for engaging with things like that. So that's a tour through some of my favourite books of the year. I mean, I've also read some shit. Sorry, Richard Wolff. But all the books listed here have been fantastic. And at the moment I'm reading this, a book called Dismantling Green Colonialism, which is a series of essays examining green colonialism in the Middle East and North Africa, which, if I'd finished before writing this video, I'd probably have listed as one of my top of the year. But as it stands, it will probably just end up as a video next year. So looking forward then, what's in the cards for 2025? Well, I've got a few ideas. The first, I think, will probably be a video based on that paper on neoliberal fascism that's currently in peer review that I wrote with my friend Guin. It's going to look at how the neoliberal form of fascism that is emerging is not a radical break from neoliberalism or liberalism, but a development and intensification of existing elements. I'm also looking to write a video just on some of the blood-soaked imperial destruction committed by the US, which I think will be quite a useful little idea. And I have a sort of half-formed idea to write a video on some of the ways in which science fiction envisages different futures and how figures like Elon Musk are completely vacuous with their futurism. And this would probably be just another excuse to read more Le Guin or, other science fiction writers. And I'll also just keep doing some of these book reviews. I'll probably do one on Aaron Bastani's terrible, fully automated luxury communism just for fun. And that's more of the books that I enjoyed reading. So I hope you've enjoyed this little countdown, I guess. Who doesn't like a countdown at the end of the year? And I hope you've gotten something from any of the videos that I've put out this year. And hope you're excited to see what I can make in the next one. Well, maybe next year will be the year I finally hit 50,000 subscribers. So have a happy new year. And I hope it's better than 2024. Alright, thanks for watching. As ever, please like and subscribe and share and sign up to my Patreon if you can, or give off a one-time donation via Ko-fi or PayPal. I thought this would be a fun little video to end the year with. I will just, $10 Nut patrons get their names read out in the credits, $5 Nut get their names in the credits and access to Discord servers and early access and all that stuff, and $2 Nut get all the early access and any writing that I produce for the channel. I will now cut to me reading the names of patrons, and I will see you all in the new year. Bye, love you. Demo Squid, Dying of Thirst, Soval Hayes, Earl Grey Tea, Bonnie, Katie Marshall, Joshua Moldenhauer, Nina G. Public Relations, FD Signifier, Quint Wolf, King Crawley, Anita Anispe, Ellis Wren, S, Hey Joe, Cameron Blakemore, Jacob Quinn Schenker, Menson Colbert, Alex, Tim, Daniel Swing, Unoriginal Name, Rachel Ann, Melanie Estes, Leum, Xander Corvus, Fia Westfall, Jack, TB Skyen, Christopher Poff, Morgusse, Tom Price, Cade Soiree, Esoteric Fictionalism, Austin Talman, Robin, Rachel Mixon, Duncan Skinner, Niels Abelgard, Tinfoil Pancakes, Kieran Gore, Aga Ghost, Barney Carroll, Joel, Daniel Hughes, Nelly Zacheva, J. Fraser Cartwright, Tamash Kispeter and Paul Singleton.